my teacher friends. Kristian Kuhn coming at you, affectionately known as the Bob Ross of composition, with one of the quirkiest brain children I have ever thunked up. So I know that oftentimes teachers and especially adults say that video games have robbed the current generation of their souls. And I've embraced gamification and edutainment for pretty much the entirety of my career. And in this particular writing workshop, what I want to do is gamify composition. I think this is really revolutionary. I think this is game changing. And I'm a bit of a Luddite. I'm not a graphic designer. And if there is any graphic designer that wants to team up with me and really solidify this more so than how I have it and just advance it a couple of steps further, then please contact me and I would love to work together. So before we jump in, I just want to say this. Please subscribe to the new channel. It's called Kristian Kuhn, the Bob Ross at Composition. My old channel is defunct, so everything is here. Spread the word far and wide. Tell your students, tell your colleagues. And we're growing exponentially, which absolutely delights me. So let me unpack my thinking a little bit and explain sort of the impetus to this brainchild. I think there are 5 reasons why video games should be more widely used in school. First, they provide experiential learning, and I think that's really important. I think oftentimes we assess compliance with our students, especially in my district. We're very guilty of this with our prescriptive curriculum maps. We often award the kids that comply, and it's become more of an issue of coursing and coaxing kids into doing things instead of learning. And I think when we gamify and get into edutainment, that learning actually augments a lot. So the other thing is students get immediate feedback when we gamify, which I really like. Oftentimes I know teachers sit on essays in particular for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and that precludes kids from learning. So the other thing is players learn from failure. And I know in particular as a composition teacher, I liken myself to a coach because oftentimes kids are very fragile. And when I critique them, they have glass jaws and they crumble. And I'm like, hey guys, everything can't be rainbows and gumdrops. I liken it to this, right? If I'm a basketball coach and we're in the state championship game and I have a kid on the bench who consistently double dribbles, travels, and throws the ball in the opposite hoop, I ain't putting that kid in the game if it's close, right? If we have a chance of winning the state championship. And I liken the state championship to exams, right? I'm an AP teacher. I'm in New York State. I have the Regents exam, and I have to prepare them for that. But I also need to prepare them for real world literacy, and most of my kids end up going to college. So fourthly, students tend to stay engaged in the content a lot more when I gamify it. And then here's the kicker. Games make complex knowledge fun. So what I'm going to do for this is demonstrate how my students will write FRQ1 from the 2023 exam, Shaving by Richard Blanco. And just to familiarize yourself with this, I'll show you the prompt. So here it is. In Richard Blanco's poem Shaving, published in 1998, the speaker writes about the act of shaving. Read the poem carefully, then in a well-written essay, analyze how Blanco uses literary elements and techniques to develop the speaker's complex associations with the ritual of shaving. So common fodder prompt for literary analysis. I'm doing this for AP Lit, but if you're doing on-level courses, we write similar plots. I'm just using shaving as demonstration because I know a lot of teachers are familiar with that particular prompt. So the question becomes immediately, how do I write the introductory paragraph? And I use heuristics. And this is where it's going to get a little tricky and kind of cool and a little bit pie in the sky. You can gamify a heuristic. You cannot, at least in my conceptual understanding, gamify a template. And I know that most teachers use templates, and I particularly don't like them all that much because I find that we front load students' verbiage a little bit too much with all those prefabricated sentence stems. It takes the organic nature of their thinking and their writing right out of their hands, and it becomes very prescriptive. And again, I don't think that's needed, especially at the secondary level for most kids. But in order to gamify instruction and to really get kids to hone in on their compositional skills, I always say this: you got to Bob Ross your instruction. So I provide plenty of exemplars and models for my students so that they can become independent writers. And here's a little analogy that I always use. Bob Ross used heuristics. I use heuristics. His was called the wet on wet technique. For the purposes of this demonstration in this video, I'm going to show you the heuristic of the inverted thesis, just to give you a working sense of how I gamify this. Bob Ross would get to the easel, get to the canvas, and he would paint with and for us. And I think English teachers in particular are very guilty of assigning writing instead of explicitly teaching it. So I always implore teachers when I'm working with them in the National Writing Project or doing consulting work, get to the proverbial easel, get to the proverbial canvas, and paint with and for your students. But here's the kicker: with a heuristic, all right? So let's jump right into this, and I'll show you how I gamify this. But here's the thing: I got a cheat code for the game. Kids love cheat codes. I remember being like 10 years old when Super Mario's came out on the original Nintendo. And my cousin gave me all the cheat codes, and I was like, dude, this is the best game ever. So check out this hack with regards to our prompt. Implicit in that prompt, and this is true of FRQ1 and FRQ2 on the AP Literature exam. It's true of FRQ2 on the language exam, and any literary analysis prompts on your state exams. Implicit in all those prompts are two questions. And the first is, what is the authorial intent? And the second is, how does the author construct meaning? If students answer both of those questions in their introductory paragraph, they're guaranteeing themselves the thesis point, and that's half the battle. So let's break down what the inverted thesis looks like and all the components, and then I'll explain how I gamify this. So as I alluded to earlier, my students always invert the thesis for literary analysis. And what I mean by that is this: they end with the thesis. Well, let's talk about what the thesis must constitute. When a student answers the question, how does the author construct meaning? That is the thesis. In the inverted thesis paradigm, the very last sentence is going to be the question or the answer to how does the author construct meaning. The whole introductory paragraph is going to be 4 sentences. So the first 3 sentences answer the question, what is the authorial intent? And teachers cloak that in different language. Some say universal theme, universal truth, the exigence. I call it authorial intent. Other teachers call it context background with a thematic focus. It doesn't matter how, what your verbiage is for that. So that's going to comprise the first 3 sentences. So there's other things that go in here in the introduction. I like to see a fair amount of tier 2 level vocabulary. It is an academic task. So any good wheelhouse SAT caliber level words are nice. And I like to tell students this: good writing is not using $1 million words. You got to stay in your lane. You got to sound natural. You have to have a very easy cadence, voice, rhythm, flow in your writing. And then the last thing that I want my students to focus on are their sentence constructs. I explicitly teach the 12 sentence types and the 20 sentence patterns. And if you go digging in this particular YouTube channel, I got a slew of videos on that. So for my students are syntactical ninjas if they pay attention in class. and can make some pretty artful choices at sentence level. So in the introductory paragraph, and actually throughout the entirety of the essay, unless a kid has a reason to do it, you really should avoid parallel syntax, unless like at the, in the conclusion of syllogisms and the conclusion paragraph. For emphasis, you may want to do that. So let's recap that. The introduction for the inverted thesis paradigm is going to be 3 plus 1, 3 authorial intent, 1 construction of meaning. All right, I got a big kicker in the pants for you. Atari video games, a lot of them, are in sequences of 6. So each level, there's 6 things that the student must do. All right, this is where it's going to get tricky. Pac-Man, each level, there's 6 things that you need to do, especially in the first 4 levels of the original Atari 2600 Pac-Man. There's 6 power pellets on each level, all right? And you can play these games online. They're there for free, and I'll explain how, the playing and the writing coincide in just a second. So Pac-Man is the first game. Another one that I researched, one of my old favorites, is Q-Bert. And let me explain the 6 moves that are essential to this. So when you have those cubes there, they're stacked in a series of 6. So for Q-Bert to get to the top, he has to do 6 moves. So the 6 moves in the introductory paragraph are: student needs to address the universal truth, the authorial intent, the exigence, in 3 sentences. They also need to read the passage correctly and find the salient terms, devices, techniques. That's going to go in the last sentence. They have to invert it, otherwise they will invariably write plot summary or like regurgitate the story and give like a plot synopsis or a cliff note summation. They got to focus on those sentence constructs for voice, rhythm, and flow. There needs to be sufficient and ample tier 2, and it's exactly 4 sentences long. So kids can play Q-Bert in order to get that compositionally squared away on paper. The other game that I play with my students is Space Invaders. As you can see from the graphic, there are 6 rows, right? And in order to annihilate all 6 rows, you got to do 6 things, right? Universal truth, salient terms, devices, techniques, invert, sentence constructs, tier 2, 4 sentences. So without further ado, let me show you an introductory paragraph for Richard Blanco's shaving, and I'll break down the 6 things that students do, and then I'll tell you how I gamify it as well. So here it is. I'll just read it from the top so that you can get a sense of how it reads, an inverted thesis reads, and then I'll unpack it in a couple of slides. So here it is. Death is not the opposite of life, but is instead an integral and interconnected part of it. In fact, every aspect of life and living is conjoined in the sense that nothing really separates man from nature. Mere deeds like shaving and writing are woven into the great scheme of how every aspect of existence serves to remind the individual that everything is tied together. Blanco hits upon this concept through his extended metaphors and syntactical arrangements. So that gives you a sense of how it's executed perfectly, right? That's the inverted thesis heuristic. So in terms of gamifying, what I do is this. I have kids write, and then I tell them immediately, especially if they're playing Pac-Man, if a ghost gets them. I immediately let them know that they got gobbled by a ghost if they have some compositional glitch in it whatsoever. Same with Q-Bert. If they have any compositional glitches in it, they fall off the cubes and they have to start over. Excuse me. All 6 things need to be there. And with Space Invaders, the same concept applies. So let me break down that first introduction and show you all the 6 bit parts that are essential in the comprising of this introduction. So as you can see here, I'll read it again just to unpack it. Death is not the opposite of life, but is instead an integral and interconnected part of it. In fact, every aspect of life and living is conjoined in the sense that nothing really separates man from nature. Mere deeds like shaving and writing are woven into the great scheme of how every aspect of existence serves to remind the individual that everything is tied together. Blanco hits upon this concept through his extended metaphors and syntactical arrangements. So let's tackle the 3+1 first. In red, I highlighted the three sentences of authorial intent, universal truth, universal theme, exigence, right? In blue, I got the construction of meaning. So I think that two of the most salient things that constitute the construction of meaning in Blanco's shaving are the extended metaphors and the syntactical arrangements. Usually students focus on 2 or 3 terms, devices, techniques when they state the construction of meaning. In green, I got a few of the tier 2 level words going on. And then in terms of sentence constructs, if you just eyeball that, you can see that I don't have any parallelism going on at all. And I'm not doing anything super trick-rated at sentence level, but avoiding the parallelism is really huge. So young, emerging, struggling writers often over manipulate and over rely independent clauses and short, simple declarative sentences. So teachers, you know what I'm saying when you read essays and you have that droning da 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 rhythm or cadence that's created at sentence level in student writing, right? It's very droning and just not advanced enough for the secondary level. So that might be confounding and a little confusing. So let's do it all over again. And I'll show you the 6 moves that are in exemplar number 2. I'll read it from the top and then I'll unpack it. Everything is one. Life and death are one, the river and the sea are one, and so is the act of shaving and writing. When one can see how everything in life is contingent upon the other, the mundane becomes miraculous. Blanco highlights this through his frequent employment of similes and syntactical arrangements. So let's talk about those 6 moves again, right? So in reading that, we got 3 sentences of authorial intent. The last sentence is the construction of meaning. So in this one, it says the employment of similes and syntactical arrangements. So we got the thesis point. The construction of meaning is there. Tier 2 is really good. Just nice words like contingent, mundane, employment, right? Again, don't overcook it. Sentence constructs are flying in this one. That second sentence with the double semicolon adds nice variation, voice, rhythm, and flow to it. So it's all there, and it's exactly 4 sentences long. That's what we want every single time. So as students are writing, they're simultaneously playing the video game. And I just get over their shoulder and say, you got to work on a couple of things here. So for example, I might point out to a kid that sentences 1, 2, and 3 are running parallel. That's equivalent to a ghost gobbling you. That's equivalent to falling off the cube. That's equivalent to getting zapped in Space Invaders, right? So you don't want to have 3 sentences that parallel each other. Or let's say that a student gets too plot summative, or they start quoting in the introduction. Oh, God forbid, I do not like quotes in an introduction. Like there's no need for quotes at all. Or they regurgitate the prompt, zap, 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 get it all out. And it's immediate feedback for them, which is super cool. It keeps them engaged. So let's look at a third one just to really solidify this. Again, 3 sentences authorial intent, 1 sentence construction of meaning, tier 2 sentence constructs, 4 sentences. Those are the 6 moves. For the individual who sees how everything in life is connected, death is but the next natural segue in the grand mundane adventure. Like that's the exigence. That's the whole kit and caboodle right there. Man is forever linked to the natural world. He comes from it and spends his earthly days in it and will return to it upon passing. When one can see how all the individual pieces of life link together inextricably, it can afford a lot of peace. And then here's our construction of meaning. Listen for the terms, the devices, the techniques. This is the thesis. Come last, invert. Blanco arrives at such an epiphany through his naturalistic imagery, extended metaphor, and syntactical maneuvers. All right, let's keep that in the back of our mind and go back to the 6 moves. Universal truth expressed in 3 sentences. First 3 sentences. Salient terms, devices. Yup, that's the last sentence. It's inverted. Thesis comes last. Sentence constructs, they are a-flowing. Tier 2 is plenty and sounding in the wheelhouse and natural, and it is exactly 4 sentences. So those are the essential 6 moves that students make. And again, all these games you can find online. I actually have old Atari systems. I used to game all the time. I was so addicted to video games as a kid with Nintendo and Atari. So I have like old Blackberries and stuff, and kids have these on their Nintendo Switches. They can download them on their phone. They have readily accessible games with the devices they have. My students also have Chromebooks. Our schools provide them with Chromebooks. So it's very easy for me to gamify. So introductions are done. We gamified it. And then you have to ask yourself the question, so how do I write the body paragraphs? And I'm not going to show you the whole body paragraph because this would be like an hour-long video, but I'll just give you a teaser of it. And I know some of you are very familiar with my work, and you know that for body paragraphs, we always use the syllogistic method. So it comes from Aristotle. It's an Aristotelian device, and basically it's like this mathematical calculative formula, heuristic, that has 3 parts to it. First premise, second premise, conclusion. So the first premise is going to be an argument containing terms, devices, techniques. The second premise is going to be the textual support, and we want to teeter-totter balance the quoting and the paraphrasing. And the conclusion of the body paragraph is going to be the textual analysis. That's the link, the echo, the promise back to the prompt, the thesis, and the first premise. All of this is going to take 10 to 12 sentences, right? So heuristics have numbers. So 4 sentences intro, 10 to 12 sentences for each body paragraph. Let me just show you what a first premise looks like and how I would gamify it. So in terms of structure and chronology and sequence, I want my students to start from the top of Blanco's poem. They have to have some kind of organizational structure to proceed through the analysis. So I'm not big on stems, but early in the year, I have my students use a clause right from the onset, comma. It indicates to the reader that you're going to stay supremely organized and that you're going to have a tight line of reasoning. So I like that stem. In the rest of this first premise, again, it's going to be exactly 3 sentences. I want them to multitask and begin to link terms, devices, and techniques together because that helps them with complexity. Right? The kids that go 1 paragraph syntax, 1 paragraph diction, 1 paragraph tone, that's garbage, right? We don't want them doing that. It's too simple. The kids that write those 4 or 5 sentence bagger paragraphs, where are you going with that? There's not enough support or analysis in there. So I want to break them of all those bad habits. So let me read through this first premise and just to give you a sense. Right from the onset, Blanco manipulates his syntax to highlight his theme. So you can hear me using terms explicitly and implicitly. In stacking similes, he also reinforces the idea that life's big mystery is quite simple to understand. Colon, right? You still want to be cooking those sentence constructs. Everything's connected to the laws of nature and the natural order of things. Even his reflections upon his father's life while shaven belong to this sense of connection. So you can see there are multitasking in there. All right. So in terms of the first premise, guess what? Atari games typically have 6 moves in them. There are 6 things that have to happen in the first premise, right? So you can just go to level 2 of Pac-Man, Q-Bert, Space Invaders, and look over the kid's shoulder as they play and say, you got zapped, or bingo, dude, awesome, you cleared level 2. So once you clear level 2, you got to get to the second premise. Well, what is that all about? Ka-ching, here it is. You got to go hunting. You got to go terms and devices and techniques hunting. The first premise is a promise. And everything that you promised in there, you need a quote and or paraphrase for it, right? So you got to go get your quotes, your paraphrases, and keep it all connected for the line of reasoning to stay intact. Now, I'm going to end the video here. I'm going to wrap up in just a second, but know in my YouTube channel, I have a full video on Richard Blanco's shaving. So if you want to see full syllogisms, backtrack to that and see it. And I have a whole bunch of AP literature, on-level text for poems and short stories and novels and plays, tons of literary analysis videos. So I'm going to wrap it up here and bid you well and say happy teaching and happy writing and happy gamifying. If you need to reach out to me and have any questions, hit me up, teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. And again, I'm going to reiterate this because I'm super stoked about this concept and I think it revolutionizes composition. So if there are any companies or software engineers who are like, dude, Kristian's on to something, then hit me up with an email. I would love to hear your ideas and see if they could link up with my ideas and we could advance this and market it. So I also am a lead teacher for the National Writing Project, and we do professional development throughout the calendar year. Some is free, some's for a nominal fee. So if you want to see what those PD events are, take a look at my webpage, www.teachinghowtowrite.com. I also present often with NCTE, Perfection Learning, and the College Board, so you can see my whirlwind of tours on that webpage. Students, if you're watching this, know that I have my own tutoring company, Write at Ivy Write. I'm expert on college personal statements and the application process. I used to work admissions at Brown, and I've helped thousands of kids get into real good elite schools. And I've also helped a ton of students get over the AP Lang and AP Lit hump. So I've been teaching both of those courses for over 2 decades. So that's a wrap, my friends. Happy gamification, happy edutainment. I'll be making more videos like this. And as I learn how to, make graphics and things of that and team up with other companies and software designers, I'm going to really lively this up and really take it to a whole other level. So stay tuned, subscribe, and stay abreast of my work. Take care for now.